Hey, it's me again. It's quite a bit later than I anticipated. Back with chapter 10. The first go round had a terrible noise, so I've been checking out this OBS software. It's a huge, would it be good to be an audiovisual guy? You can't imagine how much is involved with this. But anyway, I added another microphone, then I added another one, and that didn't work, so I was experimenting on Facebook. It's, like late now, it's 10 after 11, but I'm determined to do a better job with chapter 10. It's a good chapter and deserves a good reading. So, Phoenix and the Falcon, you can get it on Amazon, of course. It's got a cool back, right? Check it out. I tell your friends I want this to be a movie someday. It would be a great movie. So, Helena, I said at 7:45, she's had a very difficult time. She's found possibility of life with Valamir, or maybe getting home. She wants to get home to Constantinople, maybe. And here we are, chapter 10. The wind blew hard, pummeling the walls of the tent and driving the flames in the crude hearth upward. Helena shivered from the burst of cold. As Valamir grasped one of her hands, his expression changed, becoming veiled. Suddenly she felt oppressed by the pungent odor of his sweat and the steadiness of his breath. He was too close. Her heart pounded. The blood coursed through the veins of her legs, and she remembered Cansbar. The tent seemed to spin. She needed to hold on to something, anything to stop her vertigo. Yet she would not reach out to Valamir. A vision of an old crone, saliva dribbling from her lips, flitted through her mind. As Lena recognized the face, she wanted to scream. It was her own, only much older. Through sheer force of will, she steadied herself, turning from the madness whispering in her ear. From within she heard her grandfather's voice gently reminding her to watch her breath, watch her body, without judgment, without concern. It's a reflection of the One, he seemed to say. She breathed quietly, feeling her fear as sensations rippled through her body. It was as if the air vibrated, casting a shimmering blue tint. She felt a heaviness lift from her shoulders. Her heart quieted. She looked at Valamir anew. He no longer seemed larger than life, only a man who was tired. His face was drawn with fatigue. His eyes were troubled. The tent was ordinary again, the drab brown colors obscured by the gloom. She felt refreshed and more alert, but could not understand why. She set aside the puzzle. You should sleep, Valamir. As if to ward off his thoughts, he closed his eyes. Reopening them, his expression was fierce. Are you well, Helena? Are you in less pain? Confused, she hesitated and then said, Yes. That is good, he said more to himself than to her. His blue eyes glinted in the firelight. With ease, he pulled her to his lap. His face against her hair, he rocked her like a child. Comforted by the side-to-side motion, Helena was not frightened by his closeness. She broke the spell. Morning will come all too soon. We both need rest. Not masking his desire, he stared at her. I promised you, Helena, he said, his breath in her ear, but it's hard. Sick with panic, she shrank within herself. Her body retreated into immobility as a last defense. Her throat ached, and she felt her fragile bridge of trust, so carefully constructed, crumble into dust. Valamir smiled with self-deprecation, and the air stopped beating against her ears. He whispered, I frightened you. Still weary, she nodded slightly, feeling his hardness through his clothes. Anger rose within her, and she lashed out, bitterness an unexpected ally. What woman is safe with any man? Why take by force when by waiting I can hope for joy, he said. Steeled against his soft words, she stared at the ground. His lips compressed into a frown. Don't you believe me? Do you think I'm a 12-year-old boy without self-control? She spoke evenly. Trust is a gift. You are a man with a man's needs. He shrugged his shoulders with a smile. There are more than enough willing campfires to satisfy my needs, Helena. The image of him intertwined with another woman tore at her. She despised herself for caring, realizing he would follow the way of men, sharing himself as he pleased. She glared at him. He had a way of creeping under her defenses, subverting her resistance. His face was alive with sudden mirth, tinged with impish satisfaction. Then she was reminded all at once of Thunimer. As he chuckled to himself, she wanted to slap him. "You're jealous," he said, laughing. He stood up, holding her in his arms, and twirled around within the confines of the tent, by sheer luck breaking nothing. When they were both dizzy, he stopped, then half fell down on his bed pad, with her in his arms. He looked more than a little pleased. Pulling her down to the bed, he kissed her lightly on the mouth. Her body did not stiffen against him, but became still. With reluctance, he loosened his embrace, but remained beside her. His body was warm, his chuckle deep as he repeated, "You're jealous." She punched him hard in the arm. "Stop gloating," she said through her teeth. "Shh, Helena, I'll stop," he said. "I'm happy that you care, even if a little." He kissed her again with tenderness, his hand stroking her hair. His embrace gave her a feeling of completeness, yet at the same time made her angry. She pulled away from him, holding him at bay, with her arm extended and her hand pressing against his chest. "Next time, ask first." "What if you say no?" "Accept it." He smiled, but his eyes were speculative. "I could love a woman like you, Helena. You're strong." With that, he turned from her and promptly fell asleep. She lay awake a long while, watching him before joining him in his dreams. It was dark. The light lay low on Canspar's hearth. Ludmilla placed her hand on the man's throat, checking for a pulse. Lena edged closer to the bed, wondering why everything seemed enlarged. Then she saw her grandfather and understood that she was dreaming. His blue eyes opened, alive, despite his agony. He was dying again. 13 once more, she leaned over him and tried to hear his whispered words. "It's time to remember, child. You're my heir, Helena, not your father. Protect the legacy." "What do you mean, grandfather?" "Remember, Helena." She woke to morning, but felt uneasy. Vladimir was outside in conversation with Karatapan. The background noise of the camp had become louder, like a steady drone. Her thoughts drifted back to her dream. Her grandfather had exhorted her to remember. Puzzled, she wondered if he meant the vision by the funeral pyre. The answer hid in the back of her mind, eluding her. She arranged her clothes and deftly brushed her hair. She smelled meat cooking and was hungry. All at once she realized that she had lost her cocoon of numbness. She wanted to blame Vladimir and his vitality, but could not. The change came from within. The brush in her lap, she remembered her vision of the crazed crone. With a shudder, she understood that hate was no protection against despair. Its only gift was madness. Yet the journey back to life hurt like a foot that had fallen asleep, with sharp, prickling pain. A blood-curdling shout startled her. It was joined by another, followed by roars of laughter. The marauding party was back at the camp. Corellia would not be far. At the thought of him, she shook. Hugging her knees to her chest, she tried to regain her self-control, but could not. Her very being remembered Mikhail's head struck from his little neck, then Corellia's sword against her throat, and the Hun's fetid breath as he pushed her to the ground. Vladimir planned to break camp today. The thought of being near Huns made her cringe. With all her heart, she wanted to stay sequestered in the tent, hidden. When Vladimir returned, she attempted to hide her distress. He paused at the doorway, then slowly sat down. His arms around her, he held her closely. She stopped shaking, his presence acting as a buffer against the harshness of reality. She was ashamed of her need. Touching her chin lightly, he lifted it, raising her eyes to his. "What's frightened you?" She could see that he was edgy and preoccupied. She felt awkward, hating to bother him with her fears. Tell me, he said. With a deep breath, she forced herself to speak. I'm afraid of Grelia. He brushed a tender of hair from her cheek. I'll keep you safe. She blurted out, I feel like a child lost in the dark with monsters chasing me. You're my wife. Any man who touches you is dead, as is my right under the law. Her voice was small. They wouldn't hurt you? He laughed. No one would dare. I'm close to Attila. Even Grelia? He's a mad dog, needing to be put out of its misery. She nodded in agreement, but wondered aloud, why do you hate him? He has no honor. The village, it was the worst I've ever seen. The people died in agony. And it was Grelia, I know, who whipped the men into a frenzy. You and that woman Magda are the only ones left. His final words reverberated in her mind. All at once, Helena understood her dream. She traveled back to the last night of her grandfather's life, locked deep in her memory, and remembered. Kansbar, do you promise that you'll send a message to my steward? Lucistrand had asked. His face was ashen, his voice slurred with pain. Yes, Kansbar answered, avoiding her grandfather's eyes. Tell the guides they shall be well rewarded. I will. I have your word? I'll take good care of your granddaughter, Kansbar said. His gaze shifted to Helena, but his expression brought her no comfort, only a twisting dread, a need to be far away. Good, Kansbar, that is very good, Grandfather said with a gasp. He paused, regaining strength, and Helena realized then that he was dying. Did your father ever tell you about me? Kansbar looked down. There were stories, strange stories. They were true, Kansbar. We traveled a long way together, your father and I, exploring things that should have been left alone. In the end we came back, he to this village and I to the light. But I remember what I must. Helena, my dagger. Something in her grandfather's voice, in his eyes, made her bowels tighten with fear. She obeyed and placed the knife in his hand. Afraid of him for the first time in her life, she watched, unable to look away, as he opened the flesh of his palm in a straight line. Lucistrand held up his bloodied hand so that Kansbar could see it. Then he clasped his palms together so that both would be red with blood. With his right hand, he inscribed a rune in the air, a focus of mystical power, then another, slightly different, with his left. As he drew them, a nameless horror chilled Helena's heart. Should you, Kansbar, fail me, I curse your village. May all your children die, so that your bloodline shrivels into nothingness. May all of your people be as dust, your village as if it had never been. But Helena will live, untouched by your ruin, safe and whole. Kansbar turned pale. Ludmilla began to sob. Helena touched her grandfather's sleeve, whispering earnestly, You've invoked darkness, grandfather. I feel something strange. A presence. Send it away. Take back what you said. Nothing good can come of it. He only smiled sadly. Helena, I'll be with you always. Those were his last words. He died later in his sleep with the smile of a child on his lips. With an echo of despair, Helena returned to the present, to Balamir's impatience. He was distracted, ready to be outside. All will be well, Helena, he said. She stood up, smoothing her dress, her heart taut with pain, and remembered precisely how her grandfather had drawn the runes. He looked at her more closely. What is it? He asked. He cursed the village. I'd forgotten. His voice was tense. Who cursed the village? What are you saying? My grandfather. What have you heard about him? Gratipan seemed to know all about him, she added with bewilderment. He was loved by everyone. I hadn't heard his name until Gratipan told me the tale of the lost heiress who vanished on the Silk Route. He was adamant that Lucistrand and his granddaughter should be found. Her words a jumble, she repeated. He cursed the village. Everyone but me. No exceptions, not even Mikhail. He couldn't know that I had Kansbar's child. Maggie hadn't come to the village yet. She was not part of it, and we are the only survivors. Helena was silent, lost in thought. Finally he spoke. It's probably a coincidence. What were his words? She repeated the words verbatim, buried so long, yet so fresh in her mind, they could have been spoken yesterday. He listened, looking troubled, restless with his discomfort. Why would a curse take 5 years to be fulfilled? I don't know. He did not place it within time. It stood by itself. He shrugged, suddenly irritable. We must hurry. We ride soon. We have to fold up the tent. Come outside. She packed up her satchel and followed him, preoccupied with her thoughts, her panic about Grulia forgotten. Beyond the snug confines of Valamir's tent, the world had changed. Pairs of men, with an occasional woman, were dismantling tents. First the walls, then the supporting wooden skeletons. Bulky wagons stood nearby for storage. Huns were everywhere, astride their small, hardy horses. Sudamir was nowhere to be seen, but more importantly, neither was Grulia. The fresh morning air was delicious, reviving her, sleeping away memories of her grandfather's curse. Kratapan placed his hand on her elbow and guided her to a safe place near Valamir's horses. When Pasiel saw her, he nickered. Leah smiled, happy to see him. Tersely, Kratapan told her to sit on the large rock. He placed a bowl of food in her hand. It smelled mouth-watering, freshly cooked meat mixed with roasted grains. You'll not have more until nightfall. They don't stop for the noon meal, Helena, so eat what I prepared. Without another word, Kratapan hurried off, taking her satchel to the waiting wagon. She stared after him and was suddenly reminded of Miriam, her old nurse from so long ago, who had been equally adamant. Shaking her head with bemusement, she quickly ate the entire meal, then wrapped the bowl clean with some long grass before placing it carefully down on the rock. She touched her bandaged right hand and noted that the throbbing had lessened, becoming a dull ache. Stretching, she stood. Kratapan now helped Valamir with the tent. The two men had stripped its outer wall and wrapped it in a neat bundle. Their speed was remarkable as they worked in unison. Before turning to the next task, Kratapan glanced at her. Put the bowl in the wagon, Helena, and take one of the flasks from the front. As she obeyed, Helena put one of the flasks in her satchel. The wagon was sturdy, made entirely of wood, without any decoration. Already its interior was packed neatly. Meant to be pulled by a pair of horses, it only had 2 wheels. Some men had larger ones, able to stand alone on 4. Valamir's had no roof, only rungs to hold down a tarp. Absorbed in his work, Valamir had not spared her a moment. Feeling isolated, Lena sought comfort in Pasiel's company. As she untangled his mane with her left hand, she regretted sharing her memory of the curse with Valamir. It had disturbed him. Yet as she thought of the runes, she felt a strong compulsion to draw them. As if outlined in fire, the images were etched in her mind. She resisted the urge. Ignoring the wave of macabre feelings, she checked Pasiel's legs and hoofs with fierce concentration. When she heard a hollow laugh, her skin pricked with fright. She held on to the white stallion as if he could exorcise her fear. Angry at herself for being afraid of shadows, Lena shook her head. She pictured light all around her and spoke in Persian. The name of the wise Lord, be gone from me. I'll not have you. The beauty of the morning with its white fluffy clouds returned to her, vanquishing the heaviness as if it had never been. She looked up and found Kratapan's troubled eyes. He stopped his work with Valamir and watched her. She wanted to reassure him, but had no words. She felt cut adrift from humanity, connected only to Pasiel. The tent pole came down with a thump. Kratapan, distracted by Lena, had broken the smooth rhythm of the teamwork. He had dropped his end of the pole. Her mare, Sorel, spooked at the noise, snorted loudly. Pasiel looked with interest, but did not dance with fright. By Mithras, Valamir shouted. I'm sorry, my mind wandered, Kratapan said. Well, it's something we can't fix, he answered, his anger downgraded to annoyance. Lena tried to quiet the mare, bridled and saddled, ready for the day's journey. With only one good hand, she found her hard to handle. As she led her away from the commotion, Helena knew that she would not be able to control her under saddle. These past years, Sorrel had only been used as a broodmare. Cansbar had not thought her much good for the plow, but even he could not bear to destroy her. The mare was beautiful, her brow wide, tapering down to a narrow nose. Instead, he had bred her for size, pushing her womb to its limits by using his workhorses as sires. "Easy," she said. Her voice was firm yet soothing, but she felt clumsy, handicapped by her injuries. She felt someone's eyes. Looking quickly, she caught Valimir watching as she handled the mare. His expression was unreadable, even cold. Her heart sank. She felt the barrier between them and missed his warmth, wishing again that she had kept her disturbing memories to herself. When he smiled, his stern expression was transformed. Her relief was tangible, but it brought a sudden shyness. He narrowed the distance between them and in a few strides had taken the reins from her. He jerked them down once. The mare jumped to the side, making an attempt to bolt. He let her play out a little, then snapped the reins again. Sorrel gave up and stood quietly, her eyes watchful. Still holding the reins, but loosely, he stepped close to Helena. He leaned toward her, his breath whispering across her face. "Your story troubled me, Helena. Such things are known from the old days of Thrace." Spontaneously drawn to him, she laid her head against his chest, her left arm wrapped around his waist in a tentative embrace. She felt his hand touch her chin, raising it. With a kiss, he held her. She felt as if they were locked together, alone in their world. With reluctance, he broke the contact. "I think I'm more than halfway in love with you, Helena. You're in my heart." Her defenses were useless against him. "You brought the colors back. I only wish it didn't hurt so much." He smiled, shaking his head. "You talk in riddles, but your voice is sweet." As he looked over her shoulder, his tenderness vanished. Following his eyes, Lena saw Thudamir. He was mounted, his entourage behind him, a male servant, an Ostrogoth woman, a large black dog, and several horses. His eyes fixed on her, he sneered. "Seems I'm ready first, Valimir, but I've seen you've been busy. Show respect, this is my wife." Thudamir's expression became a study in innocence. "Your packing is all but done. What else could I have meant, Valimir? I don't like the way you look at her." Bevian edged his horse closer and smiled down at the couple. "Hilda misses you, Valimir. I treat her well, but I know which one of us she has always preferred. After all, you were one of her favorite customers." Overhearing, the woman flashed Valimir a smile. The look that she gave Helena was far from cordial. It was not venomous. Despite her veneer of sensuality, her posture was erect, her features open, quite different from Maga's dark, brooding looks, so full of hate. Helena wondered why she had become a camp follower. Clearly she was handsome enough to have found a husband. Thudamir jerked his thumb towards Helena. "Well, how was she last night?" Valimir's answer was an incoherent roar. Moving with the grace of a dancer, he leapt at his brother, pulling him down from his horse. He threw him on his back, punching hard. Far from helpless, Thudamir defended himself, hitting Valimir in the stomach. The answering blows did not stop Valimir, as he kept the advantage, pinning Thudamir to the ground. Helena felt confused. While she hated to see the brothers fighting, another part of her wanted Thudamir to suffer. Soon the brawl lost its momentum. Valimir released him from his stranglehold and stood looking down at him impassively. Thudamir stared back, his nose bloody. Then they both started to laugh. Valimir offered him his hand and hoisted him up. They grinned at each other like two boys. Karajapan shook his head with affectionate disapproval. Helena exchanged a glance with Hilda. With a smile, the woman rolled her eyes at the men's antics. For the first time since her tragedy, Helena wanted to laugh, knowing that she would never understand men. As the feeling bubbled within her, it faded abruptly. The lurking specter of grief crushed it. She tried to smile, to share in Hilda's amusement, but could not. For an instant, the woman's face softened. Thudamir pretended to punch Valimir's stomach, making him laugh. Helena was reminded of two puppies teasing each other over a bone. When Karachapan shouted to her in Persian, she was startled. Helena! Danger! Grelia! Alarmed, she turned to see the Hun approaching on his brown horse. Quickly, she was by Pasiel, without a saddle, still laying him to lower his head his legs she could mount. She tried to warn Valimir, but the words died in her throat. Seeing Grelia, Hilda scowled with disgust and spat on the ground. Meanwhile, Kratapan shouted to his brothers in Greek, "Watch your backs!" Valimir and Theodomir moved as one, playfulness set aside, and faced Grelia. Each side of his horse's even canter brought him closer. In an instant, the brothers were mounted. Valimir positioned his roan between Pasiel and Grelia. Theodomir flanked her side. The mare, unattended, arched her neck with excitement, but stayed near. Though Valimir's stallion showed the whites of his eyes at being near another male, he was too well schooled to bite. Theodomir's bay horse stamped his front leg and squealed. Pasiel countered the threat by laying back his ears, ready to take a mouthful of mane. Pride satisfied, the horses settled down. Helena could not match their forbearance. Her heart throbbed with panic. She wanted to scream. Magda stumbled as she was half dragged behind Grelia's horse. Her hands were bound tightly with a long rope tied to the saddle. Her face was swollen with bruises, and the bodice of her dress was partially ripped. Helena felt something shift within her, replacing her fear with an urgent call for revenge. She wanted the Hun dead, his entrails spilling from his abdomen, the smirk on his face transformed into a death scream. Her eyes danced at the gruesome image as her hand reached to where her dagger should have been. She clasped on nothingness. As she looked at her empty hand, her very being pulsed with rage. Valimir's eyes were on her, but his expression serious. Wait. For what? She all but spat. For the gods' will, Helena. No, she said, but her voice was different, hardly her own. I won't. It would be your death. You know that. But if Grelia moves against me, Valimir said, his smile dark, then your patience will have its reward. She nodded, accepting the intrinsic promise, but not because of his words. She believed his face. It had reminded her of her grandfather's when he had drawn the blood runes. Grelia reined his horse to a halt, less than 10 feet from them. As he looked at Valimir, his expression was sullen. Had he been a dog, he would have snarled. When his eyes met Helena's, she was reminded of a wolf ready to devour its kill. She forgot everything. Valimir, Kratapan, the sky, and the earth. She concentrated only on Grelia and what he had done to Mikhail. Her right leg brushed Pasiel's side, and he moved to the left, giving her an unobstructed view of the Hun. Her body felt satiated with a heaviness, a darkness that made her feel larger, more powerful than she had ever dreamed. As she spoke, the words were ancient Persian. Grelia said a hollow voice, her voice. I curse you. Each step that you take will lead you closer to the Dark Lord. You are his, marked by him, and he will give you his special reward. You, and only you, are cursed. Your death will be long and slow. You will linger, helpless, more like a woman than a man. The Hun watched transfixed as her left hand quickly drew one symbol, then her right the other, the splint knot impeding any detail of the intricate configuration. A shadow of fear passed across his face, and for the first time he looked vulnerable. If she had her dagger, Helena would have sealed the curse with her blood. So that's chapter 10. And Helena comes into her, well, it's a power. It may not be a good power, but it's a power. So hopefully next week will be good recording, and I will see you next week. And you won't hear that screechy sound you heard at 7:45. It was pretty bad. So technical difficulties. I'll see you next week. Tell people about my book. Thank you.